Welcome back to Serious Talk, Agentic AI. I'm Greg Banks, your host. Thanks for coming along today. Here's a line from today that stuck with me. More than half of what your agent takes in should be forgotten on purpose. Knowing what to keep, what to route, and what to drop is the difference between an agent that knows you and one that starts from zero every morning. Tim Harding and Gavin Franklin opened the first pillar of our Agentic Operating System series, the signal layer and the context management. We cover what a signal actually is, the 4 memory tiers, the common operating picture they pull from the military, and how to build a system that lasts past 6 months. All right, let's dive in. Welcome back to Serious Talk Agentic AI. Gavin and Tim back with us today. Good to see you guys. Happy Monday.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
In the last episode of this series, we told you we were kicking off a mini-series about the Agentic operating system. I don't think we introduced any new phrases necessarily last time, and probably won't have any today, but we're definitely wanting to drill in a little bit more. As I was looking over some of the content for the episode and just reflecting on my life, this is what I do on Monday mornings when the coffee's not settled. My brain went back to like the first time I got a tool where I could make a macro. You sit down and you show up and you do your job and you find this task is repeating, and I'm always trying to find a way to be better at it so I can record a macro. And that's so not what an agent does. But if you're not careful, that's what you can be tempted to make AI do for you. You don't really get the full power of it. And I think as we set up the last episode talking about the OS, as you begin to dream about what an agent can do, right? It feels like an infinite number of ideas. Everybody's going to come to the table with different use cases. We've talked about that at least a half dozen times. Like, find a specific use case and start with that. Something you're trying to solve and you can aim at it. But as you do that again, and again, you're going to find a collection of things. And this OS is just a whole different way to go about it. So Gavin's prepared some content. We're going to peel back today to get into some of this. We're going to be talking about signal layers and context today. There's so much to consider there when you start having this thing do more than one thing and actually be a real agent for you. There's so much to peel back here. Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Yeah, we kind of left last time talking about all the different pillars of an agentic operating system. Now we're going to kind of dive deeper into detail and into those pillars in order. And it starts with the signal layer and signal layer management. So how are we taking stuff from all sorts of different systems, all sorts of different types of communications in a very unstructured way, and then getting it into a usable way that's usable for both the agent and in some cases, the human as well, that's working with the agentic operating system. And so that's what we're really going to talk about today. So we're going to talk, where do things start in terms of a signal? How does it land into your context? And what are some different strategies you can take collecting those signals and getting them into a very usable framework? So we'll talk about a couple different approaches that we've done with a handful of agents that we've rolled out both internally with Sirius and that we've rolled out with other customers as well. But I really want to try to keep it very principles based so you can take this and really apply it to any type of use cases that you're working on that involves creating a full agentic operating system for individuals to get the most out of using your agentic harness of choice, whether that's Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, etc. But yeah, Gavin, any thoughts on this topic too before we dive in?
Yeah, just at a high level, what I'd be really diving into here is how are we gathering the proper context from all the different systems? What triggers that? What's the best way to go about that process for your signal layers? And then how then do you take that information and sort it properly? Right? You can just dump it all into one MD file. That's not going to be very useful. So it's a little bit of the organization of that data into a way that's usable by your agentic platform.
Yeah, and I think put very simply, we say things like context management and signal layers and other jargon. At the end of the day, we're saying, how do you have a system that when you go and prompt it to do and execute a task, it feels something more like Jarvis that like knows you and your work and what you're doing and doesn't just feel like a blank slate with ChatGPT or blank slate in a Claude app. So in order to get it to feel smarter about you and what you're doing, you've got to have the signal layer and you've got to provide it the context on the back end so it feels and acts a lot more personalized to be able to help you to be more productive. You know, the more it knows about you and what you're doing, the more it's going to be able to have an actual real impact on the work that you're doing and actually put out quality artifacts that are usable in the workspace that you don't have to iterate on multiple times. So if you're looking to get the business value from these agentic systems, then you have to feed it the right context in the back end to be able to get it. So I think put very simply, that's kind of what we're talking about today. So everything starts as a signal. So let's just say like a signal is kind of a loaded term, could mean a whole bunch of different things. What do we mean by signals, Gavin?
Yeah. So basically the way that I think of signals are just a change in some sort of source system, right? And I think about it on two different sides of the house. So one side of the house is we have information that's been updated that the agent could utilize, whether that information is updated in Slack, in Salesforce, and whatever system of record that data holds, right? Additionally, the flip side of the house to it is when your agent recognizes those signals, when your agent is aware of those changes. So a lot of times in agentic workspace in particular, you're working locally, right? Where you're working with Claude Code, you're working with Codex. And when you work in that state, it is a lot of, hey, let's call and get information, not necessarily the other systems pointing to you. So if you think about this from an integration architecture standpoint, I would consider this a lot of just one-way pooling from your signal layers, right? So you want to get those signals, that updated data from your source systems into the context. And you can do that in a few different ways. The three primary ways are through skills, structured skills. We think that this is probably the most important way. You can leverage the tertiary way that we do it, which is on demand. You're interacting with the chat, with your agent. It's pooling data and sorting data through the back end into where you want the memory to be stored. However, having a dedicated skill to say, let's go pull from our signal layers all of the updated information, that's going to be incredibly useful because it is a defined point and way that you want your agent to interact with the signal layers. And then the third way is kind of on top of that, which is when do you schedule it? How does this work? Is it really just running a skill? For us, we found a lot of success in a scheduled process, whether it be a nightly run, a 12-hour run, first time you log in, like an actual schedule for yourself. So these are all various different ways of hitting those signals, those signal layers, and then retrieving information from your source systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a signal could be even, a change in data within a source system, but even things like, which are in themselves changes in data, but things you don't necessarily think of as data is like communications from people. So like emails, text messages, messaging apps, Slack, anything that represents state changes from current state to fresher information that's within the guardrails of you have your agentic system operating in could be a new signal that gives it fresher intelligence, fresher information to feel more up to date and be able to act more appropriately to whatever tasks that you give it. So I think signals can be collected through a various number of ways, right? So a signal could be a standard collecting mechanism for signals, could be like a standard connector. Claude Code and Codex, for example, ChatGPT, they have tons of them, right? It could also be a custom integration with a different system. It could be something that you run in terms of scripts on your computer. So there's multiple ways you could set up and mechanisms you could set up to collect those signals. So just kind of know that when we go into it as well. But from a signal, then we have to actually take all these disparate things happening at once and then get it into some usable state to actually give to the agent that's actually useful, that actually makes sense. If you just have random emails, random Slack messages, some updates to your CRM, some updates in your ERP, all in isolation, they don't tell a real story. But getting those all into the right place in your agentic operating system and then synthesizing those all together makes those signals a lot more useful. And so I think from a signal, there's kind of a few different primitives in terms of like where signals can actually land in your system. And so it's kind of four that we've settled on in terms of where something can land. So in terms of routing, you want to walk through that, and then we'll jump into what we've settled on in terms of a common operating picture, how we actually order these before we sort them.
Yeah. So the real importance of the operating system and pulling your signals is not, hey, we have Slack messages. Here's an update of all of your Slack messages. What you really want to get to is what do those Slack messages pertain to? And can we draw information from those Slack messages, from those emails to say, this is going to be sorted into this folder structure or to this file. That way your agent can utilize it. So I think there's a really big importance here to the sorting layer of it all, to the fact that it's not just taking whole Slack messages. It's not just taking a whole email chain and slapping it into an MD file and saying, yep, that was your email or that was your Slack message. It's taking information from those messages, from those emails, from your systems of record, and creating insights and applying those insights to the right locations, right? So you can think about when we talk about memory, we were just kind of discussing this before. Memory is, or the way that we think about memory is really long-term, durable memory that your agent is building off of over time, right? That's what we want to focus on. This is different than some of the memory that you may be used to working with when it comes to something like ChatGPT Online or Claude Online, right? So what this is saying, here's a memory structure of the way that we associate our memory to, we align it a lot to our projects. So we'll dive into that in a second. So projects is a big thing for us at our company. So it benefits us to take those snippets from Slack, those snippets from email and say, what project is this associated to? What insights can we glean from this information? And let's populate that in a way that the agent in the future is aware of what's currently going on with the project. So we see really 4 different tiers of the sorting of memory. So when it reads that Slack message, it reads that email. First of all, it's just transient observation. Your agent's going to do this out of the box inherently. This is your session context, right? Sometimes at a high level, the information that's coming into play doesn't need to be stored long-term, and it just needs to be stored transiently within your session. I would almost argue that over 50% of information coming from your signal layers is probably absorbed into transient information. You want to get that as large as possible because it means you're dealing with less memory. The next piece is a durable fact. So this just may be something that's not necessarily related to a specific area or project or entity that you're working with, but it's important. It's a fact maybe about you as the user, a fact about how you like to work, or even a fact that's important to your internal systems, right? So this is where you would store durable facts. The third layer is the project layer, right? So this is where we really see benefit, which is this signal layer is giving us information about a specific project. So we're going to take that data, we're going to store it in the project archive. That way, when you go and ask an agent about a project in the future, it has the updated information from the project folder. And then the last one is really the archive. Very rarely would you ever see something from the signal layer go into the archive, but the archive is absolutely a place that the memory lands. And typically you actually see this occur from a just stale memory in a project folder or durable memory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think 2 terms that are really key. We heard project, and then you'll hear area in terms of organizing your information. We use a framework, and we've just found it works really well with agentic operating systems. It's called the 𝗵 method by 𝗙𝗵𝗽𝗁. You can go look up his stuff on YouTube. He's been around for a couple decades. His big focus is creating a framework, just to give credit where credit is due here, of useful ways of organizing digital information. So the 𝗵 method was actually made before AI and agentic systems were really big, when things like Notion, Trello, and others, people are coming up with methods. How do we organize your life or organize your work that you're doing? So it's a really good way to work. But a project would be something that's time bound that you're working on. It could be in your daily life, or it could be at work. It's just an effort that you're working on that's time bound and has some type of scope. Like, hey, I need to do these set of tasks, this larger project, it's a collection of tasks, and I have to have it done by the end of July. An area would be a set of durable responsibilities that you have. That could be, your jobs that you have at home, and then that could be your job that you have at work, right? You're only going to have a couple areas, but they're durable areas of responsibility that you're always doing tasks against. So it's a good, useful method to kind of organize. And we found working with agents, it's really good to kind of organize things by areas and projects as well, because you're able to kind of neck down and provide really relevant context within each project or area. So when you're working on a particular engagement, for example, or a consulting firm, it knows to go grab that project, have full synthesized information of that specific project or engagement. So just a good, useful method. Again, you could go look up his stuff on YouTube as well. Super awesome material there that you could go find on the 𝗵 method, but highly recommend that. So then, yeah, I think moving from there then is, like, when we're talking about signals to context, there's this middle layer here in terms of where the reasoning happens. We're taking all of this disparate information. We have to reason over it with the model before it determines what goes where. And so we need some type of artifact, some way to house information. And what we've led on that is the common operating picture and the common operating picture refresh. So we're actually running refreshes and routing this to various common operating pictures. So what is a common operating picture? Common operating picture, typically we do one per project or area. but it's a shared operating picture in a very particular structure. We pulled it from the military. We've got a lot of vets and military spouses here at Serious Solutions. Common operating picture is something if you're a commander on the battlefield and you're coming up to try to get up to speed on the current state of an engagement, you're briefed in a very particular order of, hey, what's the mission? What's the end state? What are the critical tasks? And then right now, what do we actually know? What are the facts? What are the assumptions? What are the open questions we have? And then what tasks are actually being accomplished right now? So you can go bop, 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 and then the commander is fully up to speed with the current state. Well, that actually mirrors really well to an agent, because an agent is a blank slate. It's like, coming up, with no knowledge of what's going on. It needs to know really quick, hey, where are we at right now? And the human needs to know this too. Where are we at right now, and are we seeing things the same way? So a common operating picture just helps with that. Any other thoughts on the common operating picture, Gavin, and why it's a good fit for agentic systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two primary reasons that the COP is really powerful for us. Number one is the fact that the agent is aware of whatever context you give it, and you want the context to be succinct. You want it to be concise, right? So having a COP on a project, whenever you work on that project, being able to load that COP immediately is exactly the information the agent needs at a high level to be able to help facilitate your low level tasks. So that's a really big power for us. Number two is it's incredibly scalable, not just in what's intake, right? Because you can add, we talked email, Slack, Salesforce. You can add as many systems as you want to the COP. And as it goes and hits that scheduled refresh, whether it's something you schedule, whether it's something you instinctively say, okay, I'm going to run this before I start my day. It's approaching those signal layers and saying, what exactly about this project or this area has been updated? I'm going to update my COP. It's also scalable, and something that we're continuing to push is it is shareable and universal. So the idea of having one COP per project team, so everybody's operating off of the same picture, common operating picture, right? So this is something that you actually see being reflected in agents, even on platforms. Salesforce is a big one with Agentforce, understanding the COP, understanding like how the data plays a big role in what your agent can do successfully.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really good method or medium of getting various different agents and various different people seeing current state the same way. So they're all acting towards the same objectives. And we actually split the COP into two different pieces in terms of what the agent's allowed to do within a COP. Because one thing to keep in mind here, as you start giving more and more autonomy to your agentic operating systems, what you want to be sure is that humans are driving the goals. Humans are driving the end states that you're pushing for. Humans are driving the very critical decision points. The agents are maintaining the day-to-day and helping accomplish towards those goals. So we've actually split the COP into areas where the agent is only able to propose adjustments to a common operating picture on a project or area versus what an agent is allowed to do direct write and write freely. So areas of the common operating picture that an agent is only able to propose changes based on changes to signal layers would be the mission for that project or area, the end state, what it is that you're actually pushing towards, the critical tasks, which are the 3 to 5 things that must happen for that project or area to be seen as, and any key decision points. Those are key things you want to keep human in the loop on. The agent shouldn't be able to change that. But then everything else outside of that, that's pushing towards those key items, the conclusions and recommendations, the agent can conclude or recommend whatever it wants, and as long as it's in line with those. The running estimate of like, what are the facts and assumptions we know, yada, yada. You can go all the way down. Those are the things we've found works really well to open the agent up to. Because again, you want to give it enough autonomy to actually drive value for you, but you also want to make sure that it's pushing towards the goals and objectives that you've aligned it towards. So that's kind of a good way to break it. And again, there's multiple ways you could do that. If you want to go see how we structure a common operating pictures, that'll be in the show notes here. It's part of the image that we're sharing of what a common operating picture looks like, how it's broken out between those. Again, you could accomplish the same thing though from a variety of different structures or frameworks. At the end of the day, we're talking about the principles here of a shared understanding of current state and making sure that the goals and the end state that you're pushing for is human defined, maintaining the day-to-day and the currency of the current situation, you can really lean on the agent for to help offload manual work that you would have to go and manually update and help improve your own productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then beyond the COP, when we talk about storage, maybe that's not coming from what you would consider standard signal layers and interaction with the user in particular. How then does information about a specific session make its way into memory? Because ultimately, I do believe the most powerful signal layer is the end user. Right. So the information that the end user wants to provide, the goals the end user has, and the task that it needs to accomplish, right? So when we talk about session, so this is short-term memory. What's the process from going from session to long-term? Well, we have what I would highly recommend for this is really in your system prompt. So the prompt that goes in at a high level, there needs to be some sort of reference to when you wrap this session up, or at any point in time throughout the session, if the user prompts to do so, how do we take the information that's been accumulated and store it? And we typically see that happening in a skill or a sub skill that would be executed by a sub agent, perhaps running in the background throughout the session. But we can be very specific about what information we want to store in things like our user information, our COPs, right? Like maybe just the fact that we're telling, how many times the agent will spit out some information about a COP and you're like, that's just not right. This is actually the information that's correct. You want to make sure that makes its way back into the COP, back into the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really good test of your agentic operating system is if you've got your signals being created correctly and you've calibrated the way you want your context organized, whether you're using common operating pictures and paramethod or other methods, you should have less prompting to correct the way the agent is viewing and seeing your context. If it's taking just as much work to go correct your agent on what it collected overnight and how it organized the information, then you got to go fix the system. Don't just keep correcting it. Anytime you see an issue in your operating system, treat that as a bug and go fix the system, fix the source of it. It's going to be a pain for the first couple of weeks if you're rolling out a personal operating system or rolling out to your team, etc. But that is investment in productivity later, because solving the earlier pieces of your agentic operating system is going to multiply in terms of productivity towards the end. And so that's where you really have to have a major focus of thinking of it as a system and treating it as a system when you're not getting the value you need out of it in terms of how you go correct it. If you find yourself manually correcting, you're just going to keep manually correcting it every single day. Your system's never going to improve. And so that kind of leads to one of the other methods that we found that's a really good way to help lead to that improvement, because you want not just you queuing on how to improve the agentic operating system, but you actually want the agent itself to have some types of observations of what's working, what's not working, and have some way to look retrospectively and recommend self-improvements as well. You want a self-learning agentic operating system as well. And so that's another concept that we found that's worked really well with context management, and that is session scratch. So session scratch is what we're using for transient observations. And there's a couple different things that we've identified as a useful way to organize and capture session scratch. And so maybe, Gavin, you want to talk to that and the values that can provide to actually create a self-learning, self-improving agentic operating system.
Yeah. So really what we've seen from session scratch, we break it down to 4 different categories. You have your action of what the section was attempting to accomplish. You have your gap, which is really an important piece here, right? It is what information was missing during the session. What information did the user have to provide or correct from the agent? You have your patterns, so reoccurring behavior of what is being asked for, what are we seeing between the interaction of the user and the agent occurring most often. Is there a lot of information that's being missed from a CSS standpoint? We're trying to style a whole bunch of information over and over again. Are we missing logos, things like that? And then you also have your friction points. So what slowed things down? Very similar, but in this aspect, it could just be misinterpretations of the user's requests. Right. So what friction points are being seen there? So really what we do with these within those session logs is we take those logs and then we have a weekly schedule that these logs can only be added to, which I think is really important. Right. So that's important because between sessions, the agent can't necessarily go in and update. I fixed this problem already because I didn't have this error this time. So at the end, we have that weekly sync that goes in and says, let's look at our session scratch logs and see what we can improve, whether that be about a memory or some sort of future plan to improve the agent itself. A lot of times it's within our memory, right? What are we pulling from the external signal layers, and what are we prioritizing as sorting as long-term memory within our COPS, within our user information, within our area information? What can we make sure that we're doing better next time to keep that stored?
So yeah, there's a lot you could do with that too in terms of like a weekly retrospective. So it's first see what value you're getting from it and how you have to tweak your system prompts and your skills, et cetera, to get valuable observations from the agent. But you first probably want to start where maybe it's in a weekly review skill where it's sharing observations that it had throughout the week, and it's just sharing it with you in the session or on your computer if you're using something like Obsidian or Notion. As you start tweaking and getting and seeing that, okay, hey, these observations are getting better and better because I'm actually tweaking and updating the operating system and the prompts, et cetera, it's getting more and more accurate. It could actually just go ahead and maybe create backlog items in your project management system for your agentic operating system. So it's already sitting there for you to validate and say, hey, I either want to prioritize this or nope, I'm going to not prioritize this and move it back. Or it could even go and create a GitHub issue if you're leveraging something like a GitHub to manage your agentic operating system backlog. So, think through how not only can you improve the system, but how can you make something self-learning and self-improving over time. Again, you probably don't want to jump to that right away, but as you get it more capable and as you start seeing, okay, I actually am very aligned with a lot of the recommendations it's providing, then make that step of observation to implementing a systematic fix even smoother with a lot less steps in the middle. So you continue to improve at an even more rapid rate.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on something that I think is incredibly important to call out when we talk about the agentic operating system. We see this as an operating system, not the application layer or the possibilities of the operating system. So when you talk about, hey, we're wanting to do a weekly review, right? And I leaned very heavily into how are we pooling memory? How are we storing the memory? But in reality, a lot of times what you're going to see is, hey, I think you need to adjust this prompt, or you need to adjust this, add a new skill, add a new connection. So the operating system is really the methodology in which you deal with your external systems and deal with the context that those external systems provide. But there's a whole nother layer on top of this, which is, well, what can I do with this information? And a really powerful component of a strong agentic operating system is the fact that it's scalable to whatever you particularly work on or work to do. So we've seen users within Sirius tailor their specific agents to their workflows, but the operating system base layer remains the same. And I think that's really important when you think about scalability.
Yeah. Absolutely. So last we kind of we've talked around taking various signals, getting them into a common operating picture. We've talked about a common operating picture refresh, getting that to land in your projects or areas of COPS. But then we also have externalized memory. So what would be externalized memory and how does that fit compared to the local memory that we've really focused heavily on with the context management?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, there is a complete divide between external memory and local agent memory, right? And what we mean by external memory is very simply the memory that you have within your systems today. So you have your system of record, whether that be like you were talking about with Slack, Gmail, your Slack messages, your Gmail emails, right? These are all pulled into context, but they're not edited or manipulated necessarily by the agent when it pulls that data in. Those system records still exist within your system. And I think the most important thing to call out here is what's being built by the operating system is not a golden record or a system of record. It is simply what the agent needs to execute an agentic pipeline for whatever it is you want to do. So the reason that's important is because if you still want to execute on a record in Salesforce, you still want those Salesforce automations, all the information you've tailored Salesforce to provide to be that system of record for that piece of information. So this information, even though it is human readable for the most part, MD files, you can go in, you can dig into the memory, You can use that as a source of information. Its core purpose is to serve as a baseline of information and context for agent actions.
I think it's for the agent and it's individualized to that individual. And then when we talk about external memory, then that's kind of the final layer or final loop when we're mapping this beginning to end. And that'd be where, okay, I have this very individualized common operating picture. If I'm on a sale, it's all the information that's specific to me supporting the sale. Or if I'm on a project specific to me supporting this project. But 90% of what's in there may be entirely irrelevant to the rest of the team. And so you really have to determine what is critical shared memory across the team. And that still, as it always has, absolutely belongs in your systems of record. And you need to have a final loop from where something's landing in your COP and your agent lands it there to what then is actually relevant to the rest of your team and what actually lands in your shared memories, which is your systems of record. And then ironically, as you update those systems of record, you're kicking off new signals to your teammates' individual agents to go gather those signals to update and synthesize how those updates to your shared memory are actually relevant to their individual memories and in context and what actions they need to take there. So it's this cascading, essentially neural network across your whole team, interplaying between various different individual systems, creating a full agentic operating system. So,
which is good. That's what you want. You want your systems of record to be your communication layer about your records, about your data.
100%. And another example of how a lot's changed, but a lot hasn't. So it's a good way to kind of loop away or loop around and end at the end of the day today. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, a principle to take away is every memory or every piece of context you has, it needs to have a home, a shape, and a life cycle. And so when you're building out your agentic operating system, it's actually working and sorting out the discipline it actually takes to keep that context usable. And not just usable for a couple weeks. The real test of your agentic operating system, because we've experimented a few different ways to do this over the last year. The challenge isn't having your context be usable for 1 to 2 weeks. It's having an agentic operating system that's usable after 6 months, after 1 year, after more time than that, as agentic systems continue to grow and scale and get older, right? And so that's where you have to have a very disciplined approach with this, because the challenge is just the amount of context over time, how you're managing it, how do you keep it relevant, and how do you get rid of stale information? So we'll share some of this in the show notes here. We kind of give some examples. Again, a lot of these are principles. You could apply these in many different ways. I think the principles of what needs to be applied will end up being the same across a variety of different frameworks. But yeah, very interesting.
Good stuff, guys. My brain went to like 700 different analogies. You guys were talking about different things, but I think the one to me, if you've ever quarterbacked a football team, there's the play, the X's, the O's, and where everybody goes, right? But then there's the personalities that come into it between, is the quarterback right-handed, left-handed? Which side's the running back going? What are the holes? Like knowing all that stuff and why you practice it is you learn how to do a good handoff, right? So when I want to take what I'm doing, the person, and I want to hand it off to my agent, the more that agent knows about what I'm doing, the things I'm involved with, and what it should expect from me, the more efficiently I'm trying to reproduce what my brain does. Is anybody else blown away by what the brain does without thinking? I want the agent to think like I do. So when I give it something to do, I can give it as least amount possible and it can be as accurate as possible. All this is a way of organizing the things that we do, the areas I'm in, the likelihood of things I do on a daily basis, and then learn how to talk in the most efficient way. I think Google's broken us. I can just type 3 words and it extrapolates a million options. That's not practical when it comes to this. So really good stuff. The artifact breaks us down extremely well. At the end of the day, it takes a lot of intentionality to really have, there's a big difference between a skill or a command, which is like one little focused action, one input, one output, and an agent. And what these guys have built creates versatility. And I know in conversations with Tim, when you did the first one and then you iterated and then you handed it to somebody and you learned a lot more about how do I need to make this work for both of us without having 2 separate agents. Yes, there are individual things, but having that thing extend from person to person to person across our team without rewriting it is important. And this structure is the game changer when it comes to that. So great stuff. Love the artifact. We'll get this out to you. We've got more coming on this series. So be sure you're following the show to come back. And if you're in the middle of this fight and you realize you didn't organize, you're having some challenges, I know some guys that'd love to help you. Reach out to us at serioustalk@serioussolutions.com. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Tim, Gavin, thanks as always for being here. Appreciate the artifact. Makes the conversation a lot easier to follow. We'll look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Serious Talk Agentic AI. Gavin, thank you for making the sorting layer land. Your point about not slapping a whole email into a file and calling it a memory changed how I hear the word memory now. And Tim, the Jarvis test, who doesn't love that movie, gave me the cleanest way to explain what a real agent should feel like. Something that already knows you, not something you rebrief every morning. There's one idea to carry out of this is Tim's rule. When your agent gets something wrong, do not just correct it, move on. Treat that miss as a bug and fix the system. Because hand correcting the same thing every day means your operating system never improves. And Gavin drew that frame around the whole series, giving every piece of context a home, a shape, and a life cycle. That's what discipline for an entire Agentic OS actually is. If you're building this out for yourself or your team, the show notes have the common operating picture structure the guys walked through. So start there. If you found this useful, follow the show and leave us a kind review. It genuinely helps more people find it. Thank you to Jason Fowler for allowing us use of his song, Mystery Road. If you have questions or you want to talk through your own Agentic operating system, reach out to us at SeriousTalk@SeriousSolutions.com. The address will be in the show notes. We'll see you in part 2.